Hi everyone, so I conducted a little exercise earlier, which was to list famous INFJs according to whether they belong to one of the three categories of INFJ that I've been developing, especially since the publication of my book, The Infinite Soul. So just by way of a reminder, for those of you who don't know this already, I'm now working with the classification of three different subtypes of INFJ, or families of INFJ, whatever you prefer to call them. The adaptive submissive INFJ, the INFJ who may have really great potential, but for a number of different galaxies or reasons, tends to repress their NI in the name of getting along with other people. They're concerned with being accepted and doing what society expects them to do. So they tend to be defined by this need for belonging, this seeking for adaptation, but at the expense of their inmost subjective individuality. The solipsistic INFJ, who's the opposite in many ways of the adaptive, who's living inside their NI world all the time, is self-contained, withdraws from the world, tends to be dismissive of external reality. And finally, the spiritualized or liberated INFJ, who's kind of a synthesis of the two and has managed to attune the world of external reality and the NI world to create a kind of symbiotic relationship which transcends the severance between the two and attains a certain sense of peace, and often has a kind of charisma that comes with that. Often that resides, and this is something that I've discussed in previous videos, in the ability that the INFJ has of articulating a project for external reality that is isomorphically connected to their symbolic NI world. A projection of their inner world into the concrete mechanisms of external reality. It's difficult to do, but it's key for spiritualization. But I have a list of names there, and I thought it was really fascinating. I think there definitely are ideas for further research in there, and I'll mention those names to you, and I think you'll agree with me. Please, in the comments later on, share names that come to you, because I'm pretty sure that, I know for a fact that my lists are very incomplete. I'm only giving some examples, and hopefully you know at least some names there, because particularly in the case of adaptive submissive INFJs, it actually wasn't so easy to come up with names. So we might want to ask ourselves, okay, why was it difficult to come up with names for adaptive submissive INFJs? Well, in a sense, there's a very logical reason, is that adaptive submissive INFJs don't want to impinge on the social realm, right? They want to remain they want to belong, but they want to stick to the sidelines. They don't like standing out. The way for an INFJ to stand out is obviously to wear their NR on their sleeves, right? That's kind of how they stand out. Otherwise, they're not going to stand out. If you're very, very concerned not to stand out, not to ruffle any feathers, you're rarely going to become a public kind of character or figure, and therefore it will be hard to come up with examples. So funny enough, what I said was I did find some examples of adaptive submissive, by the way, but some of my notes say most INFJs during childhood and adolescence, because this mode of being is kind of a necessary stage, I think, for all INFJs, particularly given the kind of environment we grew up in and the expectations. It's hard to assert ourselves from an early age. A lot of mistyped ISFJs, particularly, for example, in fiction or even in everyday reality, the repression of NI on the part of adaptive submissive INFJs sometimes, not always to be sure, but sometimes leads to this notion that maybe there are ISFJs because they almost want to behave as ISFJs, right? So you'd be surprised, how many ISFJs are actually INFJs. Does that mean that the type is less rare than we think? I don't know. Now, in terms of actual examples, the two best examples I could find, really by far the two best ones in terms of how kind of telling they are, their examples, one is from literature, is from The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky. So the character of Alyosha, or Alexei Karamazov, the youngest in the family and the youngest of the brothers. What's interesting is that precisely he's such a famous character despite being, so to speak, adaptive submissive. I think the reason why is because he transforms, and he actually, for those who read the book, he experiences a transcendence from adaptive submission into liberation and spiritualization. By the end of the book, he's definitely a spiritualized INFJ. But you could really see how there is a difficult phase in the middle where he grapples with what his mission is supposed to be. And by his mission, we mean his vision. So before that, he was concerned to kind of, get on with everyone and be as useful as possible. He's then invested with a sense of mission, and he's able to translate his kind of NI world into what he ends up becoming. So that's a really beautiful example. The other one, who's actually very, very similar kind of trajectory, is kind of uncanny, and I only realized this when I was drawing up this list. It's a character from Attack on Titan. His name is Armin Arlert. In fact, I did make a video a couple years ago about Armin being the perfect kind of INFJ. I can see now with hindsight that the reason why I thought he was the perfect INFJ is because he actually encapsulates two different facets of INFJ life and INFJ modes of living incredibly well. So in the first season, say, like, he is definitely adaptive submissive. You can see he's lots of potential, but he is primarily concerned to get on with other people and to be accepted, and he's not daring to assert himself. And then again, there are circumstances that allow him to assert himself and to let his vision roam free and kind of define itself and then lead, provide this kind of spiritual and concrete kind of leadership. And Armin, again, by the end of the series, is a spiritualized INFJ. So we have a very strong analogy here between Alyosha from Brothers Karamazov and Armin. I don't know if this parallel has been drawn before between the two characters, but my claim is that it's very much there. It could be an interesting finding. Other examples, again from anime, Akane Tsunemori from Psycho-Pass. If you guys have seen that, she would be, I think, an adaptive INFJ for sure. She progressively kind of moves toward a form of spiritualization, but I don't think it's completely achieved. Another example who's more between adaptive submission and solipsism is Emily Dickinson, the American poet. If you're familiar with her, if you read her biography or her poetry, you'll see that there are very strong themes of adaptive submission in there, and also attraction repulsion toward the social world. So there's clearly an element of solipsism, and in fact she was very withdrawn. Now, in terms of solipsism, the solipsistic INFJ, so the second family, well, what was really interesting here is that, first of all, I can only think of INFJ philosophers. But the fascinating notion here is that pretty much all the INFJ philosophers, with the exception of one that I could think of, they all fall into solipsistic INFJ. So like that says something, right? So here we have Kierkegaard, Nietzsche. So these are the two controversial ones, because one is Nietzsche is usually seen as an INTJ, Kierkegaard as an INFP. But I think if you use a solipsistic lens through which to look at their type, you may well come to the conclusion, like myself, that they're in fact INFJ solipsists. Spinoza, Schopenhauer is like probably the best examples of them all, of the solipsistic INFJ, because you get this theme of the expression of the risk which is inherent to INFJ solipsism, which is misanthropy and a certain rejection of the human race, and Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein is also a good example, because you can really sort of almost touch the sense of torture that comes with this type, but also the genius that belongs to this type. Other examples, Georges Bataille, a French writer. He wrote Story of the Eye. He wrote a bunch of other strange writings, very solipsistic, very nihilistic. William Blake, the British poet, I think is a good example of a solipsistic INFJ, as well as Johann Liebert, the villain from Monster, the anime Monster. He is a really good example also, I think, of a solipsistic INFJ who has this misanthropic side. Now, he might not be, like, the argument against him being a good example is that, if he has psychopathy, then that really significantly alters the possible verdict we may have, maybe no verdict at all, because he can't really be classified. In terms of spiritualized, well, we have the later Alyosha and the later Armin, like I said. And again, the reason why they're so well known as adaptive submissive is precisely because they progress toward spiritualization. Unsurprisingly, there's a lot of famous INFJs who are spiritualized. That can give us the cue notion that spiritualized INFJs are common. They're not. Buddha and Jesus are probably the most famous in history. Gandalf from is Gandalf? I was going to say Harry Potter. What am I talking about? Dumbledore, I guess, would be I don't know what kind of category he would be in, but Gandalf, from Lord of the Rings, good example of a spiritualized INFJ. Charles Taylor, philosopher, would actually fall into that category. And if you watch any video, check out a video of Charles Taylor, the philosopher, and I think you'll be struck immediately by what I'm talking about. And Dale Cooper, my favorite INFJ in fiction. I've made videos about Dale before. He's the main character from Twin Peaks. I think he's a great example of spiritualized INFJ, not least because like he defies the idea that a spiritualized INFJ has to be an outwardly kind of spiritual person, like someone who really engages in spiritual activities. Like Dale doesn't really do that, but there's very clearly like a highly subjective NI world oriented like spiritual side to him. You see it throughout the show, but at the same time he's very integrated in social reality of the series, and he's very charismatic and people, like he connects well with people. So you see that he's able, like really in a beautiful way, like he's able to balance the inherent strangeness of the NI world, the inherent strangeness of his NI worldview, and he's completely accepting of it. It's important to notice this: spiritualized INFJs are highly accepting of their strangeness. They wear their strangeness on their sleeves, whereas adaptive submissive are ashamed of it. Solipsistic INFJs are almost like, they do the opposite. They kind of, it's almost like the relationship between the inferiority complex and the superiority complex. The superiority complex being perhaps all the time a massive overcompensation of an inferiority complex, while solipsism is often a massive overcompensation of adaptive submission. So they actually are probably, they're compensating the sense of, you know, being a misfit that adaptive submissive INFJs experience. Spiritualized INFJs are much more accepting, and you see that in Dale so well. You see that in Ilyusha so well as well. But Dale is a good example because he is quite noticeably kind of strange in some ways. And yet it's clear that his world of strangeness and the reasons why he's good at his job are deeply imbricated. They're deeply connected. They're linked, right? That's the transcendence of severance. So if you ever wondered, okay, like transcendence is severance, attunement between the NI world and externality, what does it look like? Look at Dale. Look at Dale is what is able to do. If you haven't watched Twin Peaks, watch it. Check out Dale, and that's the transcendence of severance. That's liberation. Okay? So let me know in the comments if you have other examples. If you don't agree with my examples, you know, I'll be curious to engage with that. Also, if you'd like me to explore one of these people in more detail, because for every one of these examples, a long video could be made, or a short video, more compact video could be made about them. It's a fascinating topic, like I said, potentially opens up new areas of research. So yeah, just looking forward to your responses in the video. And don't forget, for more on these different subtypes of INFJ, The Infinite Soul is the place to go. My new book on the INFJ Life in the Modern World, how INFJs can interact with the world in such a way to be fulfilled, find fruitful activities and work and relationships, and find meaning, because meaningfulness is obviously at the heart of INFJ happiness. It's the sequel to the Ecstatic Soul, which looks more at the inside of the INFJ mind, INFJ consciousness, and its existential manifestations. Two books go really well together. You get both of them at the links below and on Amazon. And don't forget, the lifeblood of my channel is my Patreon page. So if you'd be so kind as to consider donating to my channel, it's like $3.50 a month, I think, which is, you know, not too much. Maybe, you know, aggregated together though, it really, really helps me keep going. And you can access bonus content, you can interact with me, suggest you know, topics for new videos, and I really tend to respond and address the questions. So please consider that if you want to support my work, and I'll see you next time, guys. Bye bye.